What's up, guys? In this video, we're going to be diving into the thin API functions that enable TOML functionality within the maci library. Now, to give credit where credit is due, the thin API functions that process TOML data within maci utilize and wrap the TOMLi and TOMLi-w libraries that are actually installed as dependencies for maci. So the first one we're going to talk about is loading your TOML data from a file. So I'm going to go ahead and create a variable called file name. We're just going to call it my game TOML, which is our local file. And in order to access it, we're just going to type maci.toml. And if you want to access any of the TOML related functions, just type TOML, and then you'll be able to discover everything TOML related. So we're going to move forward with doing TOML load to load our file. And so if we just hover over this, the only argument that's accepted with the single parameter is our file name. It also accepts a path object. If you're not sure what a path object is, please look up the pathlib library in Python's official standard library documentation. Now with TOML, as you can see, unlike JSON and YAML, TOML is only going to return a dictionary with key and value pairs attached to them. You may already be aware of this, but I just wanted to point that out. So I'm going to go ahead and load our file here. Variable, and let's go ahead and use our print function. And now let's go ahead and run this and see what it shows. And this data that it loaded is the same similar data that we've been using throughout this training series in our pretend game save file. Let's go ahead and go to the TOML file just to view. So here's our username, Johnny, and here's all of our data. Let me go ahead and correct that character there. It's a knife, not nif. But this is all of our data that we've been working with so far as examples throughout this whole video series. Now, something to quickly point out, I actually changed this data type to a string of none instead of actually using none. And if you're already aware of TOML data, it does not allow none or nullable or null values or nil values inside of its configuration language. I'm not going to go into it, but that's the semantics that they've decided on. But you may have also noticed that there's also date and timestamp in there, which looks very similar to maci. Maci also supports this structure as described in the maci language section, but likewise with TOML, this will be converted to a datetime object, as you can see down here. Anyways, that's how you simply load a TOML file using the TOML load function. Now let's see how we can load TOML data from a TOML formatted string. So I've gone ahead and created a multi-line string of TOML data, just taking a snippet from our TOML file. And now I want to go ahead and load that and have it converted to its corresponding Python object. So all I'm going to do is just change this to stir. And then I'm going to take our data and throw in our string data. So now if we hover over this, as you can see, all it accepts is a single argument to the parameter called TOML string data. And then from there, it should convert it. Now you're probably used to other libraries showing load s instead of load stir, but for maci it's called load stir just to be a little bit more explicit and easily understood, especially for those who are kind of new to this space. Let's go ahead and print this out and we should get a dictionary back. So I ran that and you do see our dictionary of our string data that was formatted in TOML. Now something you may have noticed is that a lot of this data looks very similar to maci's structure, and you're not wrong. Maci might actually be able to parse some TOML files, but that depends on the data types. So if I were to actually change this to just load string, which is the native function for maci data, this might actually process the data. Now I'm going to tell you it's going to throw an exception, and maybe you already know why, but let's go ahead and try and run this. So it's actually telling you at line 4 that there's an issue with the attribute called isAlive, and there is. And maybe you understand why. Having a lowercase boolean is specific to TOML and even JSON, but in Python it actually needs to be uppercased. So now if I run it, it actually should process it just fine, and now we get our maci data object. Now in this video, we're not here to talk about maci data at all, but if you had noticed that structure or format being similar and thought maybe I can use maci to load TOML files, it's not a bad thought. However, keep in mind certain data types that are formatted for TOML will not load into maci because maci is strictly set to load Python-style data types, not TOML. But now let's see how to dump Python data to a TOML file. so I've gone ahead and taken our example TOML data and converted it to a Python dictionary object. And we're going to go ahead and create a new file called mygame_2.toml. So in order to dump this data, we need to use the dump function from TOML. I'm going to get rid of the print function here. We're going to go back to using TOML. And we're going to change this to dump. Now, if we hover over this, it just has two required parameters that we need to pass some arguments to. One is the file name and then our data. So let's go ahead and pass our file name. And we'll go ahead and pass our dictionary data. And you may have noticed the data has to be a dictionary. That's required by the underlying library. So just remember to use a dictionary in order to store the data. And of course, with the file name, you can use a string or a path object. So let's go ahead and run this and create our new file. So we just ran it and you see our new file was created. I'm going to go ahead and drag it over here just so we can see it. And there it is. All of our Python data from this dictionary was converted to TOML format in a TOML file. And one way you can tell this is TOML is the structure, because it's using username equals value. And then we also have our data type like a Boolean using lowercase true instead of an uppercase true. Now let's go ahead and see what other options are available to us in this TOML dump function. We have a couple more, which is append. So let's go ahead and use the append option. I'm going to go ahead and just use the same data that we have here, just to keep it straightforward. Now, if we set the append equal true, this should append our data to that file. But of course, it's using the same names and values, which would cause an error loading this back in because you can't have duplicate names. Now, just for demonstration purposes, I'll show you the positive way of doing this. So if I can remove that data and we just add like a simple new dictionary, we'll just say new name and we'll just pass in data. Oops. And then run this. You see our new name gets passed in or appended to the file just fine. There were some extra new line characters there, but you get the idea. All right, so what other options do we have available to us? Go ahead and slide this over. We also have multi-line string. Now, this option allows you to write your string values as a multi-line string. And this is actually a supported feature within the underlying library. So if we actually want our string data written out as a multi-line string, your string must have new line characters in order for this to work. So if I just enable it now, my strings will not be multi-line string unless they have new line characters in them. So let's go ahead and do that. So do multi-line string, set true. And we'll go ahead and get rid of this data and replace it with our other data. So if I just run this like this is overwriting the file entirely. You see, like our username string has not changed. However, if I added a new line character into our string data here and run this again, it's going to detect that as a multi-line string for TOML and decide to write it over multiple lines, as you can see. I'm going to go ahead and remove it and put it back to the way it was. All right, now the last function I want to go over is dumping your Python data to a TOML formatted string using the dumpster function, which is kind of fun to say it that way. Okay, so I've gone ahead and removed that extra TOML file. Let's see how to convert this Python object to a TOML formatted string. And all we need to do is just add str. Maybe you've caught on by now if you've been watching the full series, but anytime you want to dump strings or even load strings, it's going to use str. You're probably used to dump s or load s, but for maci, it uses str just to make it more explicit and understood, especially for those who are new to this space. Alright, so now that we've changed this to dump string, it only accepts one required parameter, which is our data, and that's a dictionary data. And so let me go ahead and pass that in only. And we'll go ahead and print the response, which should return a string. Let's go ahead and run this. And as you can see, when we print this, it's actually printing our string, but structured in a TOML format. One way you can easily tell that this is TOML is name equals value. And of course, we see the Boolean value, which is lowercase. And in this context, that's TOML specific. Now, there is one more option you probably noticed in there, which is multi-line string. We can enable that if we want to create our strings into multi-line strings, but that only works if your strings have new line characters in them. So if I actually were to add a new line character in here, of course, without it enabled, it preserves the string the way it was, but with it enabled, and we run this, we see Our string contains a multi-line string inside of there, and it's written over multiple lines, just like in the dump example. Alright, so that's going to go ahead and wrap up this video on learning how to use the thin wrapper functions to process TOML data. I'd like to thank you for watching, and take care.